I am so thrilled to have Lorna Rose here. She is an amazing writer. In fact, I'm going to read her bio. She is a Pacific Northwest writer and poet, and her work has been recognized by PNWA and the Oregon Poets Association, and she's appeared or forthcoming in several journals and anthologies. And she was a finalist for the Fish Trap Fellowship in 2020, and she's a regular contributor to the Good Men Project. So what I really want you to know about Lorna is that she has come through some really tough times. And so I'm going to let her give a little bit more background on that. Lorna, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for having me.
So yes, tell us a little bit about the trauma and the tough stuff that you've been through, and let's dig into that a little bit, because I know you have come out on the other side a much more resilient and a wiser person. So tell us first
Sure.
about your background.
Sure. So I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and I grew up, my dad was not really around. Absent holidays and birthdays were really nothing unusual. He just worked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have three younger brothers, so there were four of us. My mom was pretty much on her own at home with us. So I grew up, either I was used to my dad not being there, or when he was there, I was terrified of him. To me, he was very intimidating. He had these brown eyes that would just sort of bore into you, and his stare would sort of like lay blame in your soul. I mean, it was like super
Right.
intense. And he would. I remember times he would snap at me and call me a bitch.
Oh,
When I was like, I want to say in middle school, we found out I had a learning disability. I have a processing delay. And I overheard my parents talking one night, and my dad asked my mom if I was retarded.
oh my goodness. Oh,
Yeah, so I think just sort of, I didn't know any different, right? So I just sort of, dealt with it how I could. There were some really nice moments too with him. And there were some really wonderful, authentic moments where he was very loving and encouraging toward me, which really kept me going. It really kept me wanting more moments like that,
right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I was 16, we found out there was a reason my dad had been absent all those times, is that he had another family. He had a
Oh,
separate wife and three boys in another Chicago suburb, and he had gone back and forth for, I think, 14 years.
oh my goodness. That is
And
nuts.
I was 16. And then 16 is hard enough.
Mm,
um and I spent, I think, probably the next 10 or so years just trying to pick up the pieces,
mm,
and really I did a lot of internalizing. I did a lot of, I went away to college and made really bad decisions when it came to relationships and
right.
drinking, and found myself in Los Angeles in my 20s, making more bad decisions.
Mm,
Um, my family culture is, or was one of, just everything goes under the rug,
mm-hmm.
smile and be polite and look pretty. And so I was left alone to kind of navigate through all this. I didn't really have anybody.
Wow. Where was your mother in all of this? I'm sure this affected her tremendously. did you communicate, or was it just like nothing was said about it?
Um, I think over the course of those 10 years that I talked about, I think we talked about it twice for like maybe a total of 10 minutes.
Wow.
So she was pretty shut down. I think most of my relatives were pretty shell-shocked. And so, I mean, so they were dealing with it, and they didn't really have the bandwidth to help me and my siblings deal with it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So how did it affect you? You said that you were making some bad choices. What did that look like?
First and foremost, a lot of promiscuity. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of fooling around, dating, and I think that came from, you know, my dad. I never, as far as I recall, touched me sexually, but there were comments that he would make. He would comment me growing up. He would comment on my nice long legs. When I started getting my breasts, he would comment on those.
Wow.
And then as I, grew up even more, he would just comment how attractive I was, and how, how desirable I must be for men. And it sounds very Freudian to say, well, that's exactly, who I became for a while.
Right.
But I really believe that, looking back, that I was trying to get his attention,
Right.
and I made a lot of bad decisions when it came to men. I was in controlling relationships. I was in, not even relationships, just sort of, one night things. And, drank a lot too. And just sort of, I thought that whole package, and I also put a lot of effort into my appearance. I wore a lot of makeup. I always had the latest, fashions on, and
Right.
straightened my hair every day, bleached my hair. I just thought that whole package is, well, that's what men, it must be that that's what men want.
Right. Right. Yeah. What was there a turning point when you said, okay, this has got to stop, or when you understood why you were doing what you were doing? What did that look like? Was there one moment in time or a period where you're like, this is why, and I need to stop?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I was probably in my late 20s. Yeah, I was like 26. So it was 10 years after this whole thing went down.
Uh-huh.
And I was in Los Angeles. I was very into the party scene, like I mentioned. And I remember one night being out with friends, and we were drinking, and we were loud. We were at a restaurant having dinner, and we were going to go out to the clubs after.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking over and seeing that this fellow diner, and it was a woman, it's an older woman, and she was reading a book. She was alone at a table reading a book. And my first thought was, oh my God, like, she's kind of a loser. It's Saturday night. She's alone. She's reading a book. Like, what is she
Right.
doing?
Right.
But then I kind of studied her a little bit, and I thought, gosh, well, wait, she seems so peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she didn't even look up at me. And here I had spent really the last few years of my life trying to get people to notice me, like
Right.
kind of watching to see who was watching me.
Mm.
And I just sort of thought, wow, she doesn't care. Like,
Right.
she's into her book.
The
She's
freedom.
alone at this restaurant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was that's when I started looking
Mm.
at my life and asking the questions, am I happy? do I want to be this? Am I where I'm supposed to be in my life right now?
Right.
And what if I'm not, which at that point I sort of knew that I wasn't, what am I going to do differently now? Like, what patterns are not healthy for me? Yeah. And I just sort of started from there.
I love that insight because there are so many times when we just kind of slog through life and we don't take the time to pause and look and say, okay, is this what I want really? Or what can I be instead of this? Or what do I want out of my life more than just what has happened to date? So I absolutely love that. So what was one of the most important things that helped you to heal from, because obviously this is a wound that you're trying to fill this hole in you that was approval and it just wasn't being filled by all the other things that you were doing. What did help you heal?
I think I'll tell you three things. The first was writing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always been a creative writer. I mean, since grade school, and it was not encouraged by and large growing up. And so I put it away for a long time. After college, went to work for corporate America, and really came back to it after I became a mom. I had my first son at 35.
Mm-hmm.
And something inside me was like, I want to start writing again. And I really want to do it this time. And so I started writing essays about motherhood, and I just sort of went from there and kept on writing and kept on writing. And pretty soon I was writing about my dad and writing about our relationship, the good and the bad and everything. And I'm writing today. I mean, I never stopped. So that's been very affirming to me.
Wow.
Counseling is another one. When all this happened, when I was 16, my mom got us into therapy. But it wasn't a very good fit who we saw.
Right.
He wasn't, he didn't really dig deep enough for me.
Yeah.
And so when I was, I think like 27, I ended up finding a counselor in California who was worth his weight in gold. I mean, he would just really, he dug in the way I needed him to. And it was absolutely transformative.
Oh, I love that. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. What was your third method?
So I did something really different when I was 26. And that's after that, I saw the woman at the restaurant. And after I started looking at my life in LA and asked myself the hard questions, I found this opportunity to go to Alaska with AmeriCorps, which is like domestic Peace Corps, and do serve on a trail crew.
Wow.
For a season. And it was nothing I'd ever done before. I'd never camped before. But here I was like, oh, why just go to rural Alaska, to do this thing. Why not? And it was hard, but it was so awesome. It was just absolutely incredible. And I mean, I learned really how to be alone. And how to just really sit with myself and be myself. And, I was free from distractions. I mean, I worked on a trail crew. There were 9 others on the crew, but, you're alone in your tent at night, and you've got lots of time with yourself.
Right.
And that was, that I needed that. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't decided to pursue that opportunity in Alaska.
Wow. I think part of recovering is understanding who you are and who you could be and knowing and loving yourself, right? Having that self-compassion. And so I imagine that was part of what you were discovering is that self-compassion. I love that, without distraction, because that can. And I imagine writing did some similar things as well. So tell me a little bit more about the writing. When you wrote, especially when you wrote about your dad, what did you feel as you were writing that? Were you afraid to write it?
No, actually,
No?
you know what? I was surprised. It felt good, and
It felt good.
it was relatively easy
Mm,
to write about him, which was the most affirming thing at all, the most affirming thing of all, because I knew then that I had done the work on
yeah.
myself,
Mm,
that this thing that had happened when I was 16, it didn't touch me.
yeah.
You know, I wasn't sitting there typing and just, you know, crying, you know, with the tears. I mean, it was, there were, he's in my memoir. I completed a memoir about a year ago, and
Uh-huh.
it's not just about my dad, it's about other stuff too, but
Right,
well,
right.
my time in Alaska. Um, but there were other parts of my story that were harder to tell than the piece about my dad.
Ah, really?
Mm-hmm.
Why was it hard? What made it hard?
Mostly just trying to describe, or trying to bring the reader with me on my journey.
Mm, mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of the more technical stuff that all writers run into, you know, how do I
Right.
pull the reader in, and how do I take the reader with me on my journey?
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
love that. And so, like I always say, none of us escape childhood without some sort of trauma. And you certainly had a lot of trauma with that. But how have your experiences in childhood helped you to be who you are today?
I do a lot of self-reflection. And I'll say it again because it's so easy to do. I don't mean internalize.
Mm,
I think I did that for a long time. You
yeah.
know, I would ask myself, well, gosh, you know, why wasn't I good enough as a daughter?
Yeah.
I think I asked myself that in different ways for about 10 years.
Mm, yeah.
But today, you know, I have two young children, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I, I want to be the parent that I needed.
Yeah. There you go.
And that really forces a lot of self reflection and self awareness. And it's hard. I mean, it's not an easy thing.
Yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. Yeah. Because you have to look at the things you really like about yourself or love, and the things you really don't like about yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
And
definitely.
just stare them down. Just stare them down and just acknowledge them, and then they lose kind of their power, right?
Sure.
I love,
Sure.
love, love that. So what advice would you have for someone who has gone through something similar, or just not even necessarily similar, but some other tough stuff in their childhood? What advice would you give them as they try to heal and move forward?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mentioned before asking yourself hard questions, and be really careful not to internalize, like I mentioned, because it's so easy to do. I mean, I was
Yeah.
doing it for a long time, and I didn't even, I purposely thought like, I'm not internalizing, but I really was. So I mean, it's easy to do.
Right.
Um, Ask yourself, are you happy? I mean, really, truly ask yourself that, and don't be afraid of the answer, you
Yeah.
know, um, and look at patterns, you know, in your life. I mean, choices that you're making, and ask yourself, are they the right choices for me?
Mm,
And maybe, why am I making these choices?
mm-hmm. Right.
Again, hard questions, and they require hard answers and
Right.
self-awareness, but it's really worth it.
Yeah.
It's really worth it. And don't, you know, I keep at it, you know, don't,
Don't
I'd
shortcut
say,
it. Just
yeah,
do it.
you got to do it. You know, in my writing, there's something I talk about, I also teach writing, and there's something I talk about earning your voice.
Ah.
And yeah, just like you said, there are no shortcuts. You've really got to dig in there,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Ask yourself the tough stuff, do the deep dive.
And get it done. Oh, Lorna, this has been amazing, amazing information. Thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable to tell us about it, just so we can gain from your wisdom. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me.
So where can people find more about you and your writing?
Ooh, awesome. Well, everything is on my website. It's
Okay.
www.lornarose, that's spelled LornaRose.com.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Perfect.
can subscribe, you can read my blogs, you can hear this in other podcasts
Yay.
that I've done. Yeah, please check it out. I'd love it. My publications are on there as well.
All right. Well, we will go to lornarose.com. And Lorna, thank you so much for becoming an amazing writer, for sharing your story, and being resilient. I appreciate it.
Thank you for this show and for helping people tell their story.